Okay, good to see you guys. Good to see you, Toby, Henry, Judd, Bubby and Zadie, Mayor, and Melissa. Okay, we find ourselves on, I'll just mute that way they can figure out on their own. We're on Lamed Amid Bays. We're on 30B. Where's that keep coming from? We're on Lamed Amid Bays. We're on 30B. Where's all that background noise coming from? I'm just going to do a general mute just to, I don't know where it's all coming from. All right, but you can unmute yourselves when you want to. Okay, so we find ourselves on Lamed Bays on 30B. And as you can see, it's actually a relatively short one. So the funny thing is, usually when it's shorter, it means more complicated, but that's not necessarily the case over here. Part of the reason is because Rashi takes up a lot of space, and Rashi that's taking up a lot of space is really from last week's sugya, in which we were spelling out all the different calculations of when the different parshios could be read. Thank God for today. It's pretty much smooth sailing. What we're going to be doing right now is relatively straightforward. We're going to talk about, we're going to wrap up our discussion about laning. Well, actually, no, we're not really going to wrap our discussion about laning. We're going to wrap a discussion about the Arba Parshios, and we're going to talk about what happens when we get back to normal. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what they would lane during the Tanios, during the fast days. And then we will just start a Mishnah tonight that gives us an overview of the what we lane throughout the year for all the different special days that come up. So here we go. We're on the second line. The Chamishas Chos and Lichasidran. If you recall in our Mishnah, you forgive me if I have like a sore throat or something, so I'm not going to project as much as usual. So on the fifth day, on the fifth week, we go back to our regularly scheduled program. So remember, we have the 4 parshios. There might be a break here, a break there, depending on how things fall out. But once we're done, we're back to our regular scheduled program. Now, the question is, we've kind of not really explicitly touched on this. When we have been deviating to acknowledge the Arba Parshios, the question is, have we been laning something differently? Was it superseding the standard Shabbos laning, or was it just replacing the Haftorah, the Maftir and Haftorah? Now, we know the answer to that, right? I hope, right? Replaces. Okay, my Bali Kree are nodding. Yes, we replaced the Haftorah, but we're going to see that wasn't always so clear cut. Here we go. So the Seder Mai, which Seder are we going back to? Rav Ami Amar LeSeder Parshios Hu Choser. Until now, we haven't been laning the regular Parshas HaShavua. We didn't read whatever Parsha it was, and it got replaced. It was superseded by the Arba Parshios. However, if Yirmiyah Amar LeSeder Haftarah Hu Choser, no, the only thing we stopped doing was, instead of laning a maftir by going back a few psukim in the Parshas HaShavua, instead, we just appended a different laning and for the Haftorah. So Amar Abaye, Kavase de Rav Ami Mistabra. I would think the Rav Ami's shita is more compelling, that it's the actual Torah reading that's being replaced. How so? Well, if we read our Mishnah, this is actually our previous Mishnah, then it seems pretty obvious from there. Why? D'Tnan. The kol mafsikin. So for all the following, we depart from our regular scheduled program. The Rashi Chadashim for Rosh Chodesh, Lechanukah, Lepurim, Letanios for fast days, Ulam Mados for the days when the Yisraelim would be laning from Parshas Bereshis while their Kohen and Levi counterparts are working in the temple, Uliyom HaKippurim. So Bishlama Lamadar Seder Parshios Hu Choser. I can understand how this makes sense. That is the actual laning of the parsha that's being replaced. Hayed Ika Parsha B'chol. because it makes sense, when Hanukkah falls out, let's say on a weekday, what's it replacing on Monday and Thursday? We don't usually have a Haftorah on Monday and Thursday by default. So let's say the laning for Hanukkah or the laning for Rosh Chodesh. What's the laning for Rosh Chodesh superseding? Well, if it's just about a special Haftorah, there isn't the special Haftorah that's superseding. It's clearly there's only laning for it to trump. So we by default don't lane Haftorah on a typical Monday or Thursday. So if so, what's being replaced over here? Must be it's the actual Torah reading that's being replaced, not just the Maftir Haftorah that's being replaced. Henry, did you want to say something or? Oh no, okay. The Idach, so how are we going to defend this? What would the other side, what would Rav Yirmiyah respond? Hagkidi Isava Hagkidis. Oh, you gotta love it whenever you get that answer in the Gemara. Hagkidis Hagkidis. What was the question? The question is, we're assuming that this list that applies in a uniform manner. The answer is that sometimes when we're saying, when we're talking about Shabbos, it'll supersede only the Haftorah. When we're talking about Monday, Thursday, it'll supersede the laning. So in other words, by default, we would prefer that it only replaces the Haftorah, but in an instance where there is only going to be Torah reading, like on a Monday or Thursday, for instance, so then it replaces the actual Torah reading. So it's more of a hybrid approach is what we would call it. And that is actually how we paskin, by the way. We go with the hybrid approach. You have Rosh Chodesh on a Monday or Thursday, the laning is Rosh Chodesh, but comes up on Shabbos, so then it's the maftir that gets changed. Make sense? Okay. Now that we brought up, we referred to the, okay, so here's the following question. Ubetanios lamali. So how many times do we lane on a typical public fast day? You give me the finger. Two, thank you, Henry. We lane twice on a public fast day. Once in Shacharis, once in Mincha. So the question is, wait a minute. Ubetanios lamali hafsaka. Why are we cutting out if a fast day falls out on a Monday or Thursday? Why would it push away the imperative for us to read the Parshas HaShavua? Likri mitzafra binyan diyoma uba mincha betanisa. Just lane, let's say, I don't know, it's Parshas B'Shalach, lane B'Shalach in the morning. Not that we have any fast days now, and then lane whatever the fast day is in the afternoon. Lane Vayichal, assuming it's Vayichal, we're going to see in the Mishnah toward the end that it's not so clear if Vayichal was the lane, but lane Vayichal at Mincha. So it's because there was no option to lane in the morning back during those fast days. So this requires a little bit of knowledge of the end of Maseches. You guessed it, Tainus. It tells us that on certain fast days that they would ordain if there was really no rain happening or other tsaros, other difficult things that befell the Jewish people. So there was actually a Seder Hayom, right? Most people Seder Hayom, if they're fasting, is you go to Shacharis, and then if you're not working, then you can just huddle up and watch movies all day and do whatever to pass the time, right? That's typical Tisha B'Av for many. So there was actually and then you go to the shul and you watch a bunch of Holocaust films. Okay, so that's how most people spend their time. I watch some movies also. We're all, I'm not saying I'm better than you, but what would happen back then on certain fast days that were ordained by the sages was there was actually a Seder Hayom. For the first half of the day, they would basically, imagine we did this, they would call everybody in, they would interrogate them, and they would basically try to determine what sin is being committed in our midst that we have to rout out, because maybe somebody or a group of people, or collectively, we are committing a particular sin that has incurred God's wrath, and we need to find out what that sin is so we can rectify it and earn God's favor. So like, imagine we did that, right? Like, that's like the opposite of like what we would do, right? We're like asking questions, live and let live. You can do all, Gilei Araya, Shvichas Dam, Avodah Zarah, we love you anyway, right? That's like the opposite of like the approach we have these days. But that's what they did. So Hechiav Dinan, what's the breakdown? Amar Abai, Nitzavr L'Pagin Yom Ha'ayim Avili Damasa. For the first half of the day, from morning until halfway into the day, they would analyze what everyone did. The Pagin Yom Lefanya, and from the other half of the day until the evening, Riva de Yoma, the third quarter of the day, would be Kara, they would lane, Umaftere, and also they would have the Haftorah. The Riva de Yoma Bo Rachmi, and in the final quarter, they would beseech God. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, Vayakumu alam dam vayikru b'sefer Torahs Adonai Elohehem, Revius Hayom, Revius Mispad, Mishtachim Adonai Elohehem. So Nehemiah tells us how they would actually spend time. It actually tells us the breakdown of the quarters, that they would spend one quarter reading the Torah of God, and the other quarter they would be confessing and prostrating, in other words, praying to God. So what's the point? What do we see from here so far? We're going to go a little bit deeper soon. But what do we see from here? What we see from here is that Kriyas HaTorah on a fast day was, according to Rav Huna, was reserved until later, the latter half of the day, Zman Mincha. But according to him, there was no Torah reading at Shacharis. So that fits very nicely. I can now understand why we don't lane the Parsha at Shacharis, because there is no option to lane at Shacharis according to Rav Huna. Now, this is just, once we've gone down this rabbit hole, we're just going to get a little bit more elucidation. The Epuchana, I would say, I understand one quarter day Torah reading, one quarter day prayer, but why would a Torah reading and prayer be in the first half of the day, and then leave the Inquisition for the second half of it? That's probably what it is. Leave the Inquisition for the second half of the day. So where do we see that the Torah reading and prayer is supposed to come at the end of the day? Lo Sakadei Siv, as it says in Ezra, yes, from Ezra, Ve'elai asu kol chareid b'divrei Elahei Yisrael al ma'al hagola v'ani yoshem mishovim ad leminchas ha'erev. So, okay, Ezra tells us about, I think it's after everyone was intermarrying and he was giving them musar and he was trying to get people to come back. So, by the way, we call people with the black hats charedim, but I believe it comes from here, that those who are chared b'divrei Elokei Yisrael, those who tremble at the word of the God of Israel. So he says, I stayed there until Minchas HaErev. Okay, Uksiv. And now what happens at Minchas HaErev as it gets to Mincha time? So then we continue. The next pasuk says, now Rashi tells us we have to read the full pasuk. So you might want to look at the side. If you have in the margin of your Gemara, you want to see the full pasuk. And I'm sure ArtScroll fills it in for you. Minchas HaErev kamti mitanisai v'kari bigdi umeili ve'echra al birkai. So he's getting up from his tightness. He's tearing his garments. He's again still prostrating on his knees. Ve'efrisa kapai el Adonai Elohai. And I lift up my palms to the Lord my God. So what we see from here is that in the latter half of the day, Ezra is praying to God, which means prayer is not at least designated institutionally for the first part. I'm sure they daven shacharis, but this time more extensive confessions, viduyim, slichos, I'm sure. So that's for the latter half of the day. But you're asking, why do we do all this? The reason is because there's an important distinction, we'll get to this soon, between the Daled Somos, the 4 minor fasts that we have, versus what this is discussing are ad hoc fast days that they would declare if there was a danger facing the Jewish people imminently. Okay, and that brings us to the Mishnah. Let me pause for a moment. Any questions, anything I can help address?
Could you just tell me what daf we're on, Rabbi? I'm
Absolutely.
sorry.
We're on Lamed Amid Beis. We're at the Mishnah toward the bottom.
Lamed what? Aleph?
Amid Beis.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Okay. Now this Mishnah, I'll help you out over there. There we go. Our Mishnah is now going to list for us what the laning is throughout the year for all the different occasions. And you're going to see it's relatively intuitive, though it'll be interesting to note what comes up on a fast day. Before that, there was one little there is I understand from the psukim why Ezra was, I understand how we derived that on the fast day, the prayer is saved for the end of the day. But why do we, I understand how we infer that from the psukim, from Ezra, but the question is, why was Ezra waiting until the end of the day for prayer? So the answer, it's not that they didn't pray at all at Shacharis in the morning. They certainly went to Minyan, but what it means is that you're only truly able to capitalize on the nature of the fast and really pray from a place of star once you've actually fasted the whole day, right? Because you go to Shacharis in the morning, it's 6:30 or 7:30 in the morning, and I don't know, I don't usually have breakfast before that anyway. I don't have an appetite until after Shacharis. So you don't really feel like you're fasting when you're davening in the morning. So the idea of making the main davening at the end of the day, toward the end of the fast, makes a lot of sense because you really are more shorei b'tzar, you feel more distress and urgency toward the end. Might work for some people. Some people, again, like myself, who aren't the best fasters, we're just praying for it to be over already. So I guess fasting was more helpful back then. It's like my doctor's like, oh, you should. Have you ever thought about doing intermittent fasting as a dieting strategy? I'm like, I do enough fasting already for religious purposes. I'm not going to take on any additional fasting on top of that. Anyway, so let's go to the Mishnah. Here we go. The Pesach Koren de Parshas Mo'ada Shel Toras Kohanim. So on Pesach we read from the Parsha that talks about the holidays in Sefer Vayikra. Batzeres on Shavuos, Shiva Shavuos. What do you think? We talk about the 7. What? No.
That's not how we do it, but yes, that's the Mishnah.
Yeah. The actual meaning is
it's the Aseret Hadibros on the first.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Yeah. Why do we get that? Most people are just like sleeping at that time, so no one knows what they're actually writing. All right, that's one of the variances also. I kind of just skimmed over. I didn't even realize that. Yes. Though Shiva Shavuos seems like a pretty reasonable candidate. For Rosh Hashanah, b'chodesh hashvi b'echel hachodesh. Okay, makes sense. Talks about Rosh Hashanah.
This was one day. This is one day of a yontif you're talking about.
Right. You're right. So with the second day in Galus, we have a lot more flexibility to incorporate other things.
The thing with Shavuos is probably because it at that time, or at the time of the Torah, certainly it wasn't called Chag Matan Toratenu. It was just the 7 weeks after Pesach, so you read Shiva Shavuot. But then it became Matan Torah, so we have to read from Yitro.
They're like, well, we don't know what else to do with it. I can't go whole holiday just around dairy food, so I'd be fine with that. So right. Henry's right that the association with Shavuos as like Zman Matan Torah Seidu, about Har Sinai and all that is kind of in lieu of having, because there wasn't a lot going on Shavuos anyway. We had Korbanos, and once we didn't have Korbanos, well, we need some theme for the day. It's almost kind of like the story of Shmini Atzeres and Simchas Torah. We don't really know what to do with Shmini Atzeres. Kal V'chomer, we don't really know what to do with 2 days of Shmini Atzeres, so we'll make Simchas Torah out of it. And then the Israelis took it from the diaspora and said, oh, that's a great idea. We should do Simchas Torah too. Okay, moving forward. Purim is Acharemus. By the way, there's an awesome Tosfos that's going to come up next week's year about why we read the Parsha of the Arayos at Mincha on Yom Kippurim. Maybe we'll do it at the end of this one just to get it. Okay, going forward. The other Varisha Shulchan, the first day of Sukkot, Korban Parshas Moados, likewise, just like Pesach, from Pros Kohanim. It was Shar Klei the Chag, the Karbanos the Chag. And the rest of the days of the Chag, we're just reading about the Karbanos of Sukkot. The Chanukah and Benesim, Chanukah, we talked about the Chanukah Samizbeach, we talked about how they were, well, makes sense because Chanukah, right? Same thing. The Purim, the Yavo Amalek, we talk about Amalek on Purim because that's a theme. Annihilate Amalek, come on. Barashi Chadashim. Wow, this is a tough one. Barashi Chadshechem. I wonder what that has to do with Rosh Chodesh. The Mamados, remember that Mamados there were 24 shifts of Kohanim that would circulate. They'd be on a cycle of when they would be up there for a week serving the Beis HaMikdash. So they had Yisraelim counterparts who would be laning Torah each and every day. And so they would lane the Maaseh Bereshis. So each day they would lane a different day in Maaseh Bereshis. And in Betanios, on fast days, this was the variance. Henry picked up on another variance, but this is the one I was thinking of. Are you guys there? My screen just froze. Do you hear me? Uh-oh. Anyone hear me?
No. No,
Guys?
no. Was yes, no, it's no.
Oh, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, where did I leave you off? Betanios? Is that what we're up to?
Yeah.
Fast days? Okay, good.
Right.
Okay, so Henry picked up on a variance before, but here is another variance that, see, I'm not the Balkori, so I only picked up on one of them. So, Brachos Uklalos, we from the Brachos Uklalos that are in Parshas Bechu Kosai. We'll get back to that in just a moment. We don't want to spend too much time on it, just get it all done in one aliyah. And then finally on Mondays and Thursdays, and B'Shabbos Mincha and Shabbos Mincha, Koran Kisidron, we read from the upcoming Parsha. However, you might say, well, we already laid the first aliyah Monday and Thursday. The least we can do is get away without having to lay Rishon on Shabbos. Too bad. You still, even though you laid it on Monday and Thursday, that's just for practice. You got to still read all the way from the beginning of the Parsha on Shabbos. Now, put a period or whatever you need there, some separation. Rashi helps us understand what this is doing over here. This next part is just explaining the rationale behind everything in the Mishnah. Shenemar, Vaydar Moshe Modei Hashem El Bnei Yisrael, Mitzvah Shu Koren Kol Echav Echav Bismano. God tells us that we should, we see from here that we're supposed to learn about the Moadim with the Moadim during the right time. It's interesting that we need, and it actually just occurred to me now, I'm not sure, I can look into this. I'm not sure why we need a pasuk to tell us that. I guess the answer is I would not think to do any laning otherwise. Certainly once you're doing the laning, it makes sense that the laning is thematically connected to the Yom Tov. So this over here is a source, that we're supposed to publicly read about the themes of the Moadim when the holidays come up. Okay. Now, there was something I wanted to address over here, very interesting, which again is the line where it says that on fast days we read the brachos and klos, the blessings and curses in Parshas Bechu Kosai. But what do we actually? Since we laid on a tiny seymour,
Vayichal.
right? We read Vayichal. That's not Bechu Kosai. So what's going on over here? So a suggestion, this relates to what we learned actually before the Mishnah. I think this might be how Rambam askins. Yeah, this is basically how Rambam would seem to fall on it, that there's no machlokis going on over here, because where we get Vayichal from, Vayichal is actually found in Maseches Sofrim. If you want to look it up, Perek Yud Zayin, Halacha Zayin, you can look up the citation over there. That's where we get the idea to lay Vayichal. So wait a minute, is there a difference of opinion or a contradiction between what it says in Maseches Sofrim versus what it says in our Mishnah? So our Mishnah might be referring to ad hoc fast days, like what we described on the fast days when they bring in the Inquisition to town and they do the laning and viduim and all those special things. But on a scheduled calendaric fast day, that would not be the case. We would lane Vayichal. And since we generally, what's interesting, I remember early in COVID, I think the OU tried to like tell everyone to like do a half-day fast or something. And I don't think anyone actually ever did it. The OU like tried, do you guys ever get that memo? Like in 2020, the OU tried legislating that everyone should do like a half-day fast because of COVID. I don't think any of their constituency was into fasting. I don't think that worked out. I didn't follow it. I was actually very interested to see if rabbis thought it had any halachic weight. Okay, now one other thing I wanted to share with you it's been a while. Our good friend Rav Zilberstein in Chashuki Chemed has a really interesting. He always has really interesting questions. He asks, what happens if you are at a minyan? Let's say it's at it's a minyan that takes place at a hospital, where people most likely are not fasting, considering they are hospitalized. Their doctors, I imagine, would say not a good idea. Though interestingly, if they're on IVs, then they might be considered fasting if they're not actually eating food through their mouths. So the question is, if you know that you don't have even a majority of a minyan that's fasting, do you still lane Vayichal, or would you just lane the Parshas HaShavua? Because it would seem halachically that you need at least the majority of the minyan to be fasting to warrant the laning of the tainus. To which the Chassam Sofer says he's addressing this in the context of Tisha B'Av, actually. So he says in the context of Tisha B'Av, I'll read it for you. This is actually what he writes verbatim. If someone, there's sometimes people have a tainus chalom, if they have a dream that disturbs them, they might accept upon themselves a fast, and it can take place in theory even on Shabbos, even though generally one's not supposed to fast on Shabbos. But do we think, this is like the opposite angle? Just because someone's fasting on a Shabbos under these circumstances doesn't mean that's not Shabbos anymore. Doesn't mean they can do malacha. It doesn't mean that they're going to lane the fast day laning if they're Balkore instead of laning the Parsha. Because it's about the calendaric day. It has nothing to do with whether you're eating or drinking. Tisha B'Av, Yom Moed Paranos, since Tisha B'Av is a day of, it's a sad day. It's a mournful day. It's a day where we talk about all of our travails and troubles. So even if you're not individually fasting, on the calendar, you open up the Luach says, this is what you're laning on a fast day. So it might be, the Shari Tshuva says that might be unique to Tisha B'Av. But when it comes to the Dalit Tzomas, the 4 minor fast days, because they're not actually instituted, what happened was, for some reason, our ancestors in their infinite wisdom decided they were going to voluntarily reaccept those 4 fast days in their great benevolence for future generations. They accepted it for us. So those days might be different. And the Shari Tshuva even suggests if there aren't even 5 people, in Chazaras Hashatzi won't say Anenu, and V'Yotziu Sefer Torah Klal. Forget about laning, the typical laning of the day. You're not going to take out the Torah at all in Shacharis if people are not laning. People are not fasting on that day. So this is like really interesting from a theoretical standpoint. I would suspect that we don't check people's IDs at the door. When I come into the chapel on a Thai Sibor, I'm not asking everyone, did you fast? Are you fasting? Are you fasting? I would hope if we have, let's say, 20 people or 30 people in the room, hopefully at least 10 of them, or at least 6 or 7 of them are fasting. That way, we're doing everything the right way. However, if you do see the numbers we have in Mincha Marav Shul these days, I'm not sure. We'll have to figure that one out. All right. Shkayach, everyone. Thank you for joining. Wonderful learning together. And we're almost done.
Good. Thank you.
All right. Good Shabbos, everyone. Take care.
Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos.